Dawn breaks over the plains of Boeotia. 479 BC. The Persian Empire, the largest military force the world has ever seen, stands 40,000 strong. Against them, 700 men, not young warriors, veterans, grandfathers, men with gray in their beards and decades of scars carved into their flesh. Spartans. This is the story you've never heard. Not Thermopylae, not the 300. This is the moment that broke the Persian invasion and rewrote the rules of warfare forever. The lambda's symbol, scratched, dented, defiant, catches the first light. 700 bronze shields. 700 men who trained since childhood for this moment. They see the enemy, a sea of armor stretching to the horizon. 40,000 warriors from every corner of the Persian Empire. Medes, Bactrians, Scythians, their spears creating a forest of death against the rising sun. The math is simple. Each Spartan must kill 57 enemies just to break even. But math doesn't account for one thing. The agoge. 40 years of training. 40 years of pain. 40 years of discipline so absolute, so brutal, that these men don't think like humans anymore. They think like weapons. A veteran removes his helmet. Gray hair, scars across his temple. His jaw sets like iron. He's not afraid. He's home. Inside the Persian lines, confident smiles. They've crushed armies before. They outnumber these old men 57-1. But then something changes. The Spartans aren't retreating. They're not defending. They're charging. 700 voices explode as one. A sound so primal, so violent, it can be heard 5 miles away. Birds scatter from the sky. The earth trembles. Shields lock. Spears lower. Bronze glints like lightning. And 700 grandfathers accelerate into a full sprint, straight into an army of 40,000. The Persians watch in disbelief. This isn't battle tactics. This is insanity. Or is it? Because in that moment, the Persians realize something terrifying. These Spartans have done this before. Hundreds of times before. This isn't courage. It's muscle memory. Bronze meets flesh. Shields shatter wicker defenses. Spartan spears thrust with surgical precision. In, out, thrust again. No wastid motion. No emotion. Just decades of perfect, lethal technique. The Persian front line buckles. Soldiers push backward into their own army. Panic spreads like wildfire. They're not fighting men anymore. They're fighting ghosts. The myth of Spartan invincibility made flesh. And then it happens. The break. One Persian drops his weapon. Then 10. Then 100. Then thousands. An army of 40,000 runs. 700 Spartans advance through the chaos. Shields still locked. Formation perfect. Breathing synchronized. Not a man out of position. Not a single man. The commander raises his fist. They stop instantly. Despite the adrenaline. Despite the momentum. They stand in the killing field they created and wait for orders. Because discipline always beats numbers. 40,000 pieces of abandoned equipment litter the battlefield. Shields, spears, royal standards trampled in mud. The largest army the ancient world has ever assembled, defeated by 700 men old enough to be grandfathers. But the Spartans don't celebrate. No cheating, no triumph. They check their equipment, tend their wounds, prepare for the next engagement. Because this was just work. News spreads across the Greek alliance like lightning. Athenian messengers run through their ranks. 700 Spartans broke 40,000 Persians in a single charge. Skepticism turns to awe. Awe turns to renewed fighting spirit. The psychological weapon has been deployed. Miles away, in the Persian camp, generals argue in silk pavilions. Maps are redrawn. Voices rise in panic. They have the numbers. They have the resources. But they've lost something irreplaceable. Belief. A young Persian soldier hides behind rocks, watching the Spartans from a distance. His hands shake. His eyes are wide with terror. He will tell this story for the rest of his life. And so will his children. And their children. Legends aren't born in victory parades. They're born in the eyes of defeated enemies. Days later, the full Greek coalition marches toward the plains of Plataea. Tens of thousands of hoplites from Athens, Corinth, Thebes. but everyone knows who leads them in spirit. The 700. Inside the Spartan phalanx, veterans drill with the same intensity as before the battle. Shield thrusts, speertechnique, footwork. Moreover, training continues. Because in Sparta, there is no after the war. There is only preparation for the next one. The Battle of Plataea looms. The final confrontation. Persians versus Greeks. Empire versus freedom. And when the two armies collide, the Persians see the red cloaks again. The Spartans. The 700. And before the first spear is even thrown, they break. The charge at Plataea becomes a rout. The Persian army, already psychologically destroyed, collapses within minutes. Not because they were outnumbered, not because they lacked weapons, because 40,000 men remembered what 700 men taught them days before. That some warriors are simply different. Section 3. The legacy, 10 to 1,500 hours. 2,500 years have passed since that charge. Empires have risen and fallen. Technologies have exploded. Warfare has transformed beyond recognition. But the lesson remains. Greek scribes document the battle on papyrus. The ink flows. The words become permanent. History is written by survivors. But legend is written by witnesses who couldn't believe what they saw. Pottery workshops paint the scene on vases. Red and black figures immortalizing the 700. The story spreads across the Mediterranean. Decades later, an aged Spartan veteran, blind in one eye, face carved with scars, speaks to young warriors. We didn't win because we were stronger. We won because we were trained. We won because we were disciplined. We won because when every instinct screamed run, we charged. The agog continues. A new generation of Spartan youth clash shields and thrust spears. The 700 become part of the training mythology. Yesterday's history becomes today's tactics manual. Centuries dissolve. Xerxes' palace at Persepolis, burned by Alexander the Great. The empire that sent 40,000 warriors eventually destroyed by the military systems those Spartans represented. The lambda shield, scarred and ancient, sits in a museum case. Modern LED lights reflect off bronze that once deflected Persian blades. School children press faces against the glass. Tourists take photos. Scholars debate casualty figures. Today, military academies from West Point to Sandhurst still teach the Battle of Plataea. Officers study the tactics, the phalanx, the psychological warfare. Hollywood makes movies. Video games recreate the charge. The 700 become action figures. History becomes entertainment. But here's what they don't tell you. Those 700 men were real. They had families, children, wives waiting in Sparta, wondering if their husbands would return. They felt fear, exhaustion, pain. They bled red, just like the Persians. But when the moment came, when the impossible stood in front of them, they didn't ask, can we win? They asked, how fast can we charge? Because this is the truth about excellence. It's not about talent. It's not about luck. It's about 10,000 hours of preparation meeting one moment of decision. It's about discipline when everyone else chooses comfort. It's about standing together when the world says you should run alone. 700 men, 40,000 enemies, one impossible charge. The plains of Plataea are quiet now. Green fields, peaceful farms. Tourists walk where warriors died. But on the wind, if you listen carefully, you can still hear it. 700 voices roaring as one. The sound of impossibility becoming inevitable. The sound of old men teaching the world that numbers don't win wars. Warriors do. This is the story they don't teach in schools. The charge that changed Western civilization. The moment 700 grandfathers became immortal. If this story moved you, if it ignited something inside you, subscribe, because there are 1,000 more untold stories of impossible courage waiting to be heard. And I'll bring you every single one. Fade to black. In the golden silence that followed the impossible victory, the plains of Plataea became a graveyard of Persian ambition. 40,000 invaders had fled before 700 aging warriors, men who should have been grandfathers, not soldiers. Yet here they stood, breathing hard, bloodied, but unbroken. The abandoned Persian equipment told the story their fleeing soldiers couldn't. Thousands of shields, spears, even royal standards, trampled into the mud in blind panic. This wasn't retreat. This was psychological annihilation. When the allied Greek armies arrived hours later, they couldn't believe their eyes. Athenian generals, hardened by decades of warfare, stood speechless. The Spartans had done in minutes what should have taken days, if it was even possible at all. But the Spartans themselves? No celebration, no victory cries, just the methodical business of professional soldiers, tending wounds, cleaning weapons, preparing for what came next. For them, this was Tuesday, the ripple effect across empires. News of the charge spread like wildfire across the ancient world. A single Persian scout who witnessed it would tell the story for the rest of his life. His hands still trembling years later when he described the bronze wall that simply refused to stop. In the Persian command tents that night, something unprecedented happened. Generals who had conquered nations, who commanded armies larger than entire Greek populations, sat in stunned silence. The math of warfare had been rewritten in blood and bronze. How do you fight an enemy that turns mathematics into mythology? 40,000 warriors, professional soldiers from across the Persian Empire, had broken against 700 old men. Not through divine intervention, not through terrain advantage, through pure, distilled discipline. The psychological wound proved more devastating than physical casualties. Persian soldiers began deserting in the night. Officers questioned orders. The machine of conquest that had rolled across 3 continents ground to a halt. Not because it was destroyed, but because it no longer believed in itself. Days later, at Plataea, the final confrontation came. The Greeks fielded a united army. Athens, Corinth, Thebes, and Sparta fighting side by side. But everyone knew where the Persians were looking. Everyone knew which crimson cloaks haunted their nightmares. The Spartans took position on the right flank, the place of greatest honor and danger. 700 veterans who had already become legends, standing exactly where the enemy feared them most. Psychological warfare perfected. When the battle began, the pattern repeated. The Spartan phalanx advanced with mechanical precision while Persian lines buckled before contact. Grown men dropped their weapons and fled at the sight of lambda shields. The myth had become a weapon more powerful than bronze. By afternoon, Xerxes' grand invasion, the largest military operation in human history to that point, collapsed completely. The Persian army that had crossed the Hellespont with dreams of conquest now fled back to Asia in disgrace. Haunted by 700 ghosts in crimson cloaks 2,500 years later, military academies worldwide still study that charge. Not as ancient history, but as timeless truth. Discipline defeats numbers. Training trumps technology. Well, breaks weapons. The Spartans at Plataea were mostly in their 40s and 50s, veterans of countless campaigns, each with decades in the Agoj training system. They weren't superhuman. They were simply what happens when you dedicate an entire civilization to creating the perfect soldier. Every Spartan boy began military training at age 7. 30 years later, they became the warriors who charged at Plataea. Another decade, and they became the veterans who made it look easy. This wasn't talent. It was 10,000 hours of practice, multiplied by 10,000 more. Their legacy echoes through history, from Alexander the Great's phalanx to Roman legions, from medieval knights to modern special forces. Every elite military unit traces its philosophical DNA back to those 700 men who proved that excellence, discipline, and brotherhood matter more than overwhelming odds. Today, the plains of Plataea are silent. Tourists walk where warriors died. Archaeologists sift dirt for bronze fragments. The blood has long since washed into the soil, feeding grass that grows over graves no one can locate. But the question remains, echoing across 25 centuries. What makes 700 men charge 40,000? Not stupidity, not ignorance of mathematics, but absolute confidence forged through absolute discipline. The certainty that training, unity, and will create miracles that numbers cannot. In museums worldwide, their artifacts survive. Shields battered by blows struck before Christ was born, helmets dented by weapons that turned to rust 2 millennia ago. Each scratch is a story. Each dent, a moment of violence that shaped Western civilization's survival. The Spartans didn't fight for democracy. They were an oligarchy. They didn't fight for freedom. They kept slaves. They fought because fighting was what Sparta did. What Sparta was. An entire civilization organized around a single question. What happens when you create the perfect warrior? Plataea answered that question. 700 perfect warriors, standing shoulder to shoulder against impossible odds, created a moment that transcended their city, their culture, even their own understanding. They became eternal, not through monuments or poetry, but through a simple, terrible truth. Discipline is destiny. Training is transformation. And sometimes, just sometimes, 700 is enough. The wind still blows across those ancient plains. The rivers still flow through valleys where empires clashed. And somewhere in the silence, if you listen carefully enough, you can still hear the thunder of 700 pairs of feet charging into immortality.
Young men still sent to kill and die for political abstractions.
O mighty Zeus, witness our sacrifice. Though we fall, our spirit remains unbroken.
It was right here, on this very ground, that the Greek forces finally routed the Persians in 479 BC. The casualties were staggering.
Under this light, the helmet becomes a witness. Every dent and scratch is a forensic clue to the violence it endured. To understand the violence they endured, I must walk where they walked, feel the dust of history beneath my feet.